Alan and Sean here from the Prancing Pony Podcast, welcoming you to the Tolkien Experience Podcast.
The Tolkien Experience Podcast is an attempt to bring the fan and scholarly communities together around our shared passion, the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Each episode features a notable scholar or member of the fan community sharing their Tolkien experience.
And now we'll send you over to Sarah and Luke.
Thanks, Alan. I'm Sarah Brown.
And I'm Luke Shelton.
Every other week, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. Hello and welcome to this edition of the Tolkien Experience podcast, in which I'm talking to Myla Malinalda. Myla's a long-time Tolkien fan and collector residing in the US. She has channeled her love for his legendarium by being a part-time reporter for Middle-earth News and collecting book editions and film memorabilia. She enjoys communicating with other fans across social media and participating in the Bookstagram community on Instagram. In real life, she's a graphic designer who enjoys incorporating her favourite fandoms into her work. Myla, welcome to the Tolkien Experience podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking me.
It's a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experience of Tolkien's work. So let's start with the first question, which is, let's take it all the way back to when and how were you first introduced to Tolkien's work?
Yeah, so I was introduced to Tolkien's work through Peter Jackson's films. My dad was a fan of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings when he was younger, and he got really excited when Fellowship was coming out. He brought me, I was 8 years old at the time, and then basically ever since watching the film, I've become, like, lack of a better word, obsessed with Middle-earth and the whole world of it. And I definitely have a strong connections to the films because I saw it when I was a kid, and I, basically love the characters as much as I love the cast. My dad would buy the extended DVD, and we'd, sit there and watch and see which scenes were new, which were extended. And I read The Hobbit as a kid and I loved it. Took me a while to get through Lord of the Rings. I remember feeling really cool in my 4th and 5th grade class reading it because no one else was, even though I didn't understand anything. I probably didn't really get through Lord of the Rings completely and fully understand until high school. And ever since then, I read Lord of the Rings multiple times, love it. I love Unfinished Tales. Still haven't fully grasped the Silmarillion. Mm-hmm. I've read it. I might have only understood 10, and that's a high guess. But that's pretty much it, just getting introduced from the films, and then through the films, discovering the vast world of Tolkien's legendarium.
So when you were introduced to the films, did you have a favourite of the 3?
I feel like I'm a hobbit at heart. So I definitely have a very strong connection to Fellowship of the Ring just because that's the most we get to see of the Shire. Uh-huh. But I love all the films. It's very hard to pick.
Yeah, because they're all very different, aren't they? They have kind of a different feel, each one.
Yeah, it gets, progressively darker and more serious. And I wish I remembered, how I processed the films as a kid. I just remember, dragging my friends to see it, and none of them were remotely as interested as I was. And it's I had to keep all of this love for, Middle-earth to myself until, I joined Tumblr in 2011, and that's when I, fully discovered, the vast community of Tolkien fans.
Oh, goodness, you fell down the rabbit hole of Tumblr.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That was quite a time.
Yeah, I'm sure. So having seen the films before reading the books, do you think that coloured your attitude to your reading or the way in which you perceived things going on in the books?
Definitely. Because when I read the books or if I listen to the audio versions, I imagine the actors. That can be a good thing or a bad thing sometimes to not be able to get your own original idea of what the characters would have looked like. But honestly, when I read the books, it makes me appreciate the films more because it is an adaptation. It's not supposed to be an exact copy. Mm-hmm. And it made me appreciate how they adapted it. There are, certainly some things that aren't the most amazing, but watching the films makes me appreciate the books, and reading the books makes me appreciate the films, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, yeah, good point. So, leaving the films to one side then and just thinking about the books, what
Hmm.
would you say is your favorite part of Tolkien's work?
As a whole, he has a very like poetic way of writing, even when it's not poetry. It's very descriptive. It's I don't really read any other authors quite like him. I don't know if
Mm,
there are that will create such a huge world. Like he created a world and cultures, which is amazing. And speaking specifically about Lord of the Rings, I love, the idea of all these types of beings, different races, different types of species coming together and defeating, this one evil thing that's just sweeping
hmm
across the world. I love
mm.
how he, writes about friendships. You can really tell he really values friendships with characters, and the idea of love in whatever form that takes.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite moment from any one of the books?
Oh man, I remember reading Lord of the Rings like on a public bus, and there was this one part where like Sam just says "I love" to Frodo. Like I forget if he's saying it out loud or thinking it. He's like "I love him whether or no," and that like made my heart burst.
Mm,
Thought that was so sweet, and obviously I reread the chapter between Eowyn and Faramir a lot because I love them so much, and you don't get to see them interact at all almost in the films.
yeah, that sweet moment when Sam he's talking to himself about
Right.
Frodo, who's sleeping in front of him, and it is a really really sweet moment. Yes,
Because
I like
they've
that.
been through so much, and they're still gonna go through so much, and they're still together. And man, it just tugs at your heartstrings.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've read the books myself so many times now, and yet there's still moments that I'm brought to tears. And the moment that does that for me every single time is the death of Theoden. I just can't help it.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh yeah.
exactly.
I recently wrapped up listening to audio, the authorized versions, and I remember like when he was basically dying, I was crying. And now
Mm.
to the BBC dramatization version, I'm just like waiting for that part because I know I'm gonna
Sob.
cry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you have a fondest experience of Tolkien's work? A moment perhaps that you were reading or watching together with somebody, or something in particular that really speaks to you?
Yeah, hopefully this counts. When there was that whole Tolkien exhibition that first started in Oxford, and then I live in the US near New York City, and so when it came to the Morgan, I don't know how they let me, but I got to attend the press day,
Wow.
which was really cool because on normal days that exhibition is just packed,
Hmm.
like shoulder against shoulder with everybody. But during the press day, you were allowed to just roam around the whole thing. There weren't that many people. You were able to basically stay there as long as you wanted. And you were able to take photos, which you aren't normally allowed to do. And I definitely took full advantage of that. I have so many photos of every single piece. And obviously, the whole thing was very overwhelming. But I remember walking past his like first sketch map of the Shire. And that was the piece that like really got to me because it was almost like, oh my God, I'm seeing the beginnings of my home, come to life. It was pretty surreal to just, be around the things he himself worked on because Middle Earth is just such a big part of my life.
Hmm.
Of course, would love to live in my own little hobbit hole.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. Who wouldn't? So, do you think then it's the art in particular that speaks to you? I mean, I know you're a graphic designer. So, is that why you connect so well with his art?
I think so. He's very much like a graphic artist. When you look at his like the symbol of Luthien, like these, how do you say it, heraldic
Hmm.
devices,
Hmm.
like these like really cool icons. I love his line work. It's very much like very thin lines, like especially in like editions of The Hobbit, you see his works. I really love his piece of the trolls in The Hobbit, you know, when they're kind of hiding behind the trees and that fire, the way he like draws the fire, that line work, it's really nice. And I love, my dad will always laugh and be like, oh, he wasn't that great of an artist, just to annoy me. But yeah, I really like his work. It really speaks to the type of work that I did a lot in high school, and I love like just cutting paper. It relaxes me, like creating paper art, and I use a lot of his heraldic devices as jumping off points because it's so fun for me to kind of dissect the shapes that he's created to, you know, represent all of these characters.
Do you have other well-known Tolkien artists? Do you have any favorites among those?
Oh man.
Where do you start?
Okay, so I love Donata Giancola. Hopefully I'm saying his name correctly. He's very, I don't know if you are familiar with his work, but it's very like classic, like painting. He's so good. He recently came out, he already had a book about his work on Tolkien. It was called like Middle Earth Visions of a Modern Myth. And he recently came out with another one, Journeys with Myth and Legend. He's amazing. I love the artist who illustrated the Hobbit graphic novel, David Wenzel. And then there's not someone who's like done work with like HarperCollins and Newton Mifflin, but there's artists like on the internet like Angela Rizza. She's really good. Oh my god, I'm trying to remember every single artist I love. There's oh man, what's her name? Ula Thynel. She's also a really great artist. You should follow her on Instagram. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm literally looking at all my bookshelves, seeing if any other artists come to mind. Obviously, there's Alan Lee, John Howard, Ted Naismith. By the way, when they're coming out with their own edition of, you know, Unfinished Tales with new artwork, I'm so excited for that.
Oh yes, I've already got that on pre-order.
I gotta pre-order, but like the thing is, like the super pretty editions are not sold in the US. They're all in the UK.
So what you need is to know someone in the UK who will mail you a
Exactly.
copy.
Exactly. I'm real like just to see new pieces from all three artists that are way up there, you know. I'm really looking forward to that edition.
And that must be really exciting for you when you're...
Sorry, I was gonna say like I don't need another edition of Unfinished Tales, but I think I need this one, you know.
Well, is it really a question of need?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's what I tell myself all the time.
Yeah. I mean, need, that's such a subjective term, isn't it? And yes, I mean, clearly I don't need another copy. I already have more than one copy of the Unfinished Tales, but would my Tolkien shelves feel complete without it? Absolutely not. So, yes.
I like the way you think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I just bought the new box set of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, the 4-book box set that's come out.
Oh, yeah, is that the one with the Alan Lee cover?
And
yeah, I just got that one.
It's beautiful.
Not gonna lie, like 90% of why I bought is that cover of The Hobbit. It's so nice and lush, and I'm like, I don't like looking at spiders. I respect spiders so much. I'm just afraid of them, but because the Two Towers has Shelob on it.
I may have sat in an armchair and stroked them for a little while after receiving them, and you know, welcome
Have that nice fresh smell.
Yes, oh yes, absolutely. There's nothing quite like gently, very gently cracking open a brand new hardback, and obviously not bending the spine because only people who are chaotic evil do things like that. But
oh my god, you would hate to see my bookshelves. Not of my Tolkien books; they're like sacred. But I have special reading set of Lord of the Rings, and those are destroyed.
Oh yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I have a paperback reading copy of the Lord of the Rings that saw me through my PhD, and that looks like it's been through the mill.
Yeah, they're well loved.
Yeah, absolutely. But my beautiful hardbacks, no, they are for admiring and only touching with permission. So
I love when you mention like that sound because I heard that crack like when you open up a new hardback so clearly in my mind.
Yeah, it's something else, isn't it? It's a real sensual experience. You can tell I have an obsession with books. I think that's
Oh,
okay.
yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I make no apologies for that, actually. So, you said in your bio that you enjoy incorporating your favorite fandoms into your work. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you incorporate Tolkien fandom into your work?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself like an illustrator, but I definitely love just losing myself, whether it's on like an actual sketchbook or on my iPad, just like drawing my own interpretations of the characters. Because I love in the films the way they sort of represented each culture, especially all the Rohirric things. It's so beautiful the way like the horse motifs and the swirling lines. I definitely feel like I've been influenced by the art department of the films of Lord of the Rings, and I have like all the art books, even the Hobbit Chronicle books that they came out with. Probably some of the best things, best merchandise to come out of the Hobbit trilogy, if I'm being honest. Like the sort of geometric lines of the dwarves and how it contrasts with how flowing the elvish cultures look. And I love working with shapes. And I think I draw a lot of inspiration from that.
Okay. Um, has the way in which you've approached Tolkien's work changed over time? I mean, your time of being involved with Tolkien's work may be a bit shorter than other people who may be listening in, but you started with the films and then you went on to the books and you've had that connection since, and you've expressed that connection through your art. Have you sensed any changes in the way in which you approach it since you first started?
I think so. When I was younger, I didn't really interact with other fans because no one in real life seemed to like Lord of the Rings. So I kind of kept to myself, and I think it helps, talking to other fans, getting more perspectives, listening and learning from people's experiences. And I think now I definitely, not to sound, this isn't like a negative thing, but look at Tolkien, his works, the films, with a more critical eye and not placing everything on such a high pedestal, because I do love like all of it, but I can understand when people might, how do I say this? Like I would personally love if there were more women. Not gonna lie, I would love that. Not to say that I didn't connect with the male characters, because I definitely do. I think there's a lot of universal things people can relate to. And I think it's great that now people are starting to get more comfortable. And, I love seeing artwork, like fan art of characters, where they're not all white. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. I love it. And I love seeing these interpretations coming out. And I mean, I love Lord of the Rings, but I love probably even more seeing it being reimagined. Because, the books have been around for so long, like we have them. The films have been out at this point for a long time. And if somebody can like reimagine it and just see it with a new eye, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, there's been some really, really good examples of new Tolkien artwork that I've seen, even just hanging around on Twitter relatively recently. Glorious stuff, absolutely wonderful stuff, and
Everyone is
it's
so
it's a
talented. I
delight. Yeah,
love it. Yeah.
yeah.
Like I want it to keep coming at me. I want it to be flooded on my Twitter time feed.
Yeah, yeah. As a complete non-artist myself, I can just sit back and kind of gasp at the talent that's coming through and be so happy at seeing these perspectives actually getting an airing, because goodness knows it's time.
I know, like for people to see a character that you might like look like them and being connect with that. Like when I saw, I don't remember if it was, I think Desolation is when we first saw that there was like a lot of different types of people in Lake Town. And when I saw like an Asian woman in the crowd, I broke down crying. Like my 3D glasses fogged up because I was like, oh my God, someone who looks like me is living in this world that I love so much. Like, we just got to keep moving forward. And like, she had no lines, they were on screen for a couple seconds. And even from that, I had such a big reaction. So for that to even be like multiplied by I don't even know how much, that would like mean so much to so many fans.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like such a trite thing to say, but representation really matters.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm going to kind of come back to something that you just sort of let drop at the start of this talk. Your issues with the Silmarillion. Let's talk a little bit about the Silmarillion. So you've tried reading it.
I've completely read it once
Mm-hmm.
through a few years, not a few years ago, probably like at least 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so intimidating. And it's so funny because in my mind, there are like, there are fans, but there are like Silmarillion people that are so amazing. And I want to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
I want to like freak out about like the elves and the different ages of Middle Earth. It's so dense. So, filled with so much history.
Yeah.
Like, I know, like, there's the Tolkien professor people recommend, keeping up with his seminars about the Silmarillion. I haven't listened to any of those, and I know I probably should. I have the audiobook just on my phone for the one day where I decide maybe that'll be the way for me to understand it. Last time I attempted, I had a notebook next to me where I would write down quotes, but then I wanted to remember everything, so I was basically just writing every single thing down, which doesn't help me. And it's so funny because my like name on the internet is Myla Malinalda, and I took Malinalda from Silmarillion because it is another name for one of the Chuchis of Valinor, Laurelin. I just thought it sounded really pretty, so I was like, that's now my name.
Mm-hmm.
So you would think I would know more about the Silmarillion than I do, but I don't, and I really wish I did.
Well, don't beat yourself up because some people do find the Silmarillion quite intimidating. Perhaps one place to start is picking up one of the books that has been expanded of one story from the Silmarillion and seeing how you get on with it, because then, of course, you've got a bit of narrative flow going, like the Children of Hurin, for example.
See, I did read that one, and I tend to read these things on public transportation because it's quite a story. I remember sitting on a train and like just looking around, being like, "Is no one like seeing this? Do you not know what's happening right now?" Yeah, I probably should. I think I'm going to reread The Children of Hurin, and then hopefully that will reignite the motivation for me to finally, slowly, because I think that's the key for me. It's just don't rush it. Just slowly make my way through the Silmarillion. No expectations, just because I will do that to myself. I'll pressure myself into like trying to understand as much as possible.
Oh yeah, there's no pressure. It's something that you can absorb into in your own space and time. But I highly recommend the Tolkien Professor with his Silmarillion broadcast, because those are really excellent for just helping to explain some of the things that people find difficult to grasp
Yeah, I
hold
need
of.
someone to explain to me. I need like to hear it.
Yeah, he's very good at that, so that would be a good place to start, definitely. Okay, so final question. And it's interesting when I ask this because it's a bit of a sort of duh question to somebody who comes on the Tolkien Experience podcast saying they love Tolkien. But, I ask, would you ever recommend Tolkien's work? And perhaps that question goes sort of down a side street by saying, to whom would you recommend Tolkien's work?
I thought about this and then I came to the conclusion that there's an instance where I would recommend him and there's the time where I would not.
Mm-hmm.
The one where I would is someone like came up to me and was like, "Hey, do you recommend I read his books?" I'd be like, "Yeah. Lord of the Rings is my favorite thing ever. Start slow, do The Hobbit, do Lord of the Rings, ease yourself in, maybe read his other non-Middle Earth books. And if you are interested in approaching Tolkien, I would say definitely do it. See if it's for you, because it's not always for, like, I know some people that they love the movies and they try to read the books and they just can't, which is fine. That's totally valid. But if somebody asked me to recommend fantasy authors or fantasy books, I realized that I don't think I would mention him, which is weird to say, kind of. It just doesn't come to my mind because I feel like if everyone knows about him and whether they are interested in taking that extra step and exploring more of the world, I would probably recommend other fantasy authors. N.K. Jemisin, R.F. Kuang, S.A. Chakraborty, Naomi Novik, V. Schwab. But I don't know if I would recommend him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a shocking realization because I am such if the people who know me in real life now, they know I love Lord of the Rings. I'm not much of a talker, but if somebody gets me talking about things I love, then I won't shut up.
Mm-hmm.
I know if somebody is interested in him, I'm saying, yeah, do it. Because it is very intimidating. I'm looking at it from an outsider's point, especially on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Good or bad, the Tolkien community is very intimidating.
That's interesting, actually. An interesting perspective. I can understand where you're coming from on that. And by the way, the list of fantasy authors that you would recommend, yes, to all of those as well. So yeah, that's actually a really interesting answer. I've never had that answer before, but that's it's good to have a new perspective on that particular question. So thank you very much for that. Okay,
Yeah.
Myla, thank you very much for joining us here at the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm really happy that you were able to find the time to come and join us.
No, I really appreciate this podcast in general. It's very interesting to listen to all the different episodes.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We have a lot of fun making these podcasts.
So much fun. It's always exciting to talk to fans and scholars about their Tolkien experience.
If you want to know more about the ways to connect with this episode's guests that they mentioned in this interview, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favourite social media sites.
That's right. We're on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and also on Twitter as @TolkienEXP. So don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking with our guests. You can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I am @LukeB.Shelton.
You can also look for me on Twitter where I am @AaronLPalmadill. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.